Friends, today we will talk about such an amazing film whose story revolves around time travel, deep obsession, guilt, and that endless love which keeps pushing a person in the same direction for their entire life. So let us begin this amazing and tangled story in a grand way. Right at the beginning of the film, we hear a man's voiceover. He says that if he did not do that special thing, then he would never be able to truly live his real life. He would always feel as if he was not really in this world at all, but only living through a faint dream. From this small statement itself, we clearly understand that man's terrible restlessness and a strange kind of longing. The scene changes, and we see two children standing near an old well. These are Stephen and Victoria, the closest friends since childhood. The two of them drop stones into the well and innocently begin counting. 1 elephant, 2 elephant. When they hear the splash sound, Stephen says that this well is probably 100 feet deep, or maybe even a mile deep. Victoria jokingly says that it probably goes straight to China. Letting his imagination run wild, Stephen says that maybe it goes all the way to Australia, or to some mysterious world where dinosaurs still rule. Both children imitate the scary sound of dinosaurs. This is their innocence, where they have no idea how this well is going to change their lives. Just then, Conrad arrives, who is Stephen's cousin. As soon as he comes, he asks proudly what they are doing near the well because playing there is not allowed. Victoria says that they were just exploring. Conrad challenges them, saying that if they really have courage, then they should climb down into the well because they are scared. Stephen fires back and says that Conrad is scared too. Conrad says that he is not scared, but right now Stephen's mother has called them for lunch. After this, the two boys begin an intense race to reach home. Now we see a beautiful garden party. Some women are gossiping there. One woman says that a particular man makes her feel uncomfortable. Another says that this man was in her husband's regiment and used to work in some secret interrogation. He often mentions the chess piece, Bishop. Just then, that man arrives. This is Robert. Robert very cleverly compliments the women by saying that they look radiant. The women politely try to move him away by sending him to bring champagne. Meanwhile, one woman gives a checkmate in chess. Racing back, Stephen and Conrad reach home. Stephen's mother, Jane, tells them to wash their hands. Victoria says, "Yes, mother." Suddenly, the children see a stranger who has become overheated from the walk. Jane asks him to sit down and sends Stephen to bring water. Stephen calls him Professor, and he accepts it with a laugh. After some time, the children excitedly tell Jane that Professor has told them about time travel, which is theoretically possible. Jane laughs and says that money can be made from theory, but it is really made from fact. Professor says that if there is no love, then what is the use of money? Professor asks Victoria to bring a card, scissors, and string. He cuts thin slits in the card and tells the children to look only forward. Professor explains that the world of one-dimensional creatures is like this. They do not know left, right, up, down. They can only move forward and backward. Victoria sees everything as a blurry green-brown color. Then he explains the second dimension, where colors seem to rush behind quickly, just like a train. Jane plays the gramophone. While showing 3D, Professor explains that humans can only see in 3D. Our limits do not allow us to see the fourth dimension. He believes that the fourth dimension is actually time. We cannot see it with our eyes, but maybe we can manipulate it. Friends, now a moment comes in the story that is going to stay in Stephen's mind forever. Professor asks Victoria for her skipping rope and makes Stephen stand at one end. He says that suppose Stephen is the beginning of a life, which is a straight line from birth to death. This is exactly how we humans see time. But then Professor folds the rope from the middle. He says, if I can bend the fourth dimension, meaning time, like this, then I can travel anywhere backward or forward in time. Hearing this, the innocent children are left wide-eyed. While leaving, Professor mysteriously says that a person should always say goodbye. Victoria asks her mother about her great scientist father. The wheel of time spins quickly, and we see Stephen, Victoria, and Conrad growing up. Stephen and Victoria create a different world in their thoughts where he will build a palace and Victoria will be his queen. They jokingly make Conrad the court jester. In the middle of this, Stephen lovingly says, "I wish our life could always stay this beautiful." Victoria smiles and replies, "Nothing in the world lasts forever, except our love. We will always love each other." Friends, this childhood love is very pure, but fate wants something else. One day while playing, Victoria defeats Conrad. Just then, Conrad's jealousy comes out. He goes to that same deep well and challenges Stephen that if he has courage, then he should climb down and see how deep it really is. Stephen clearly refuses and says that it is dangerous. Conrad calls him a coward and makes a bet. "If I drop this rope down, will you go?" And he snatches Victoria's rope away. The rope falls straight into that dark well, and with it, it feels as if their childhood innocence is also buried there. Stephen angrily starts fighting with Conrad. Mother Jane comes outside and scolds both of them and sends Victoria home. That night, Stephen stands alone near the well and keeps counting. 1 elephant, 2 elephant, as if he is not measuring the depth of the well, but the darkness of the future. The next morning, Stephen and Conrad are playing. Stephen looks for Victoria, but she is nowhere to be found. In the meantime, the two boys talk about the future. Conrad talks about becoming a soldier, but sadly says that joining the army did not turn out well for their fathers. On the other hand, Stephen says with full confidence that when he grows up, he will become a great scientist. Friends, now a tremendous time jump comes in the story. Stephen has now grown up and has become a talented scientist, and he is giving a lecture in a university. Professor Dr. Schmidt proudly says that Stephen has a brilliant mind. Stephen presents his theory. He says that the universe is not just one, but there are infinite universes, all running in parallel at the same time. Every event that could happen has already happened, is happening now, and will happen in the future too, just in some different universe. Just then, a beautiful girl sitting in the class raises her hand. The moment Stephen sees her, he freezes and says, "Victoria?" He realizes his mistake. The girl tells him that her name is Annie. Friends, Annie will later become an important part of Stephen's life. Annie asks that if we travel into the past through time travel, then would we not change the future? Stephen explains his theory by giving the example of an orange. Suppose time is a road where two paths split. On one path, the orange is completely fine. On the other, I have crushed it. Both universes exist. So if you go into the past and change something, you do not change your own future. You simply create a new universe. The lecture ends, and it becomes clear that Stephen has solved the mystery of time travel. After the lecture ends, a very disappointing moment comes. Dr. Schmidt calls Stephen into his cabin and gives him bad news. The grants board has once again cruelly rejected their funding request. Dr. Schmidt jokingly says, to lighten the mood, that in some parallel universe, maybe you have a lot of funds for research. But then he becomes serious and explains that Stephen is pushing himself too much in this obsession. He does not want him to completely forget his real life. Meanwhile, Annie officially joins Stephen and Conrad's team. While welcoming her, Conrad jokes, "Welcome aboard, but we cannot pay you a salary because we are poor like church mice." Now comes their biggest day, the 38th test of the time machine. Stephen crosses his fingers with hope and explains to Annie that sometimes humans get a faint glimpse of the fourth dimension in the form of déjà vu. Their machine works to catch these mysterious ripples of time. The machine's destination is set to their same old garden from 15 years ago. The machine starts with a heavy sound, and Stephen happily shouts, "It's going to work!" But then suddenly the machine gives a terrible spark, and everything stops. Because of cheap and second-hand parts, the machine fails badly. Completely frustrated by this failure, Conrad takes Annie out for a drink. While talking, a terrifying secret is revealed, which is the real soul of this story. With a heavy heart and tears, Conrad says that Victoria's death in childhood was not some small accident. When he threw the rope into the well, Victoria went down into that dark well to bring it back, and died there in a painful way. This horrible guilt has been eating Conrad from inside like termites. Crying, he says that if he himself had brought back the rope, Victoria would be alive today, and Stephen would not be ruining his life in this madness. On the other side, Annie goes to meet Stephen's mother, Jane. Jane lovingly makes her sit, but also gives her a strict warning that Stephen always remains lost in his own world, so she should not get too attached to him. When Annie goes to Stephen, he is sitting sadly near the machine, watching the waves of time. Here, Stephen expresses the deepest pain of his heart. He says that even today he often sees Victoria, and this life feels completely unreal, as if he is living in a dream. Crying, Stephen confesses that if he had not been a coward that day and had gone down into the well, then Victoria would be alive. "I failed her," he says in pain. Friends, here it becomes clear that this project is not just about science, but about the deep regret of two friends and the longing to bring back a love. Just then, the mysterious Robert returns. Conrad, giving up, calls him in for funding. Showing off his deep pockets, Robert gives a huge offer, a state-of-the-art lab, staff, and a complete setup. Conrad becomes mad with happiness that now their fate is going to change. But Stephen rejects the offer without even blinking, because he does not trust Robert's intentions at all. At this, Conrad's volcano, buried for years, finally erupts. He gets terribly angry at Stephen, saying that he does not want to remain just a lowly assistant in this broken-down workshop. Conrad directly accuses Stephen of deliberately punishing him for Victoria's death, and that is why he is rejecting this opportunity. The next morning, Stephen is left shocked when Annie arrives carrying a big box of expensive parts and says, "Ta-da! She has brought all this by borrowing it from the university, which means she has stolen it. Stephen panics that for this she could be arrested, but Annie boldly says that she just wants to end this bloody obsession of Stephen. In the middle of all this heavy confusion, Conrad and Annie drink at a bar at night. The next day, when Annie opens her eyes, she finds herself in Conrad's room. Although Conrad assures her that nothing happened, Annie gets scared of damage to her reputation and immediately runs away from there. Stephen apologizes to Annie for his stubbornness. He jokes that if you are going to jail for stealing parts anyway, then let us at least make use of this stolen equipment. Annie smiles and says that if the machine works, then they will go back in time and put the parts back, and no one will even know. Here, Stephen repeats his theory that changing the past does not change the future, because every possible future already exists. When Annie asks if he is 100% sure, Stephen hesitates and says, well, 99% sure. The friendship between the two grows deeper, but they have no idea that a big betrayal is growing behind their backs. The cunning Robert meets Conrad alone. He knows that Conrad has jealousy inside him, and he attacks this weakness. Robert tempts him with a big professorship, an excellent lab, and money. Filling Conrad's mind with poison, he says that he should not always live in Stephen's shadow. Looking down on him, he says that you are weak, grow up, and Annie will also be impressed by you when she sees success in you. In the lab, Conrad pretends that he will wait until morning for the test. But in truth, in the darkness of night, he works for Robert and steals Stephen's years of hard work. The next day, when Conrad talks to Annie about marrying a brilliant professor, Stephen's mind immediately clicks. He understands that Conrad, out of greed, has joined hands with Robert. How could I have been so stupid? Stephen curses himself. They find out that Robert has an old farmhouse on Mill Road. Stephen and Annie immediately rush there. Seeing the scene there, they are left stunned. Conrad has completed that time machine with Robert's money. He proudly explains that when the portal is activated, many weeks inside will be equal to a few seconds outside. Just then, Stephen rushes in and shouts, "Conrad, step away!" But Robert shows his terrifying side and points a gun directly at Annie's head. At gunpoint, Robert forces Stephen to set the machine's destination to a few weeks before the war. Stephen warns that the signal is not strong enough to go that far back. It is not safe. But Robert, blinded by greed and playing a game of death, says, "Daddy knows best." To save Annie's life, Stephen is forced to turn on the machine. The machine really works. A blue-colored time portal opens up. Robert jumps into that mysterious portal. Conrad shouts happily, "It's worked!" But in the very next moment, a terrifying silence fills the room. According to the machine, he should have come out immediately. But minutes pass and Robert does not return. Annie asks in fear where he is. Stephen's answer sends chills down the spine. Nowhere. Nowhere at all. Maybe for decades or forever. Robert, full of arrogance, has been lost forever in an unknown vortex. Because of this horrifying incident, Stephen completely breaks down. He considers himself responsible. Annie explains that it was not his fault, but in Stephen's mind, only one name is echoing: Victoria. The voices of childhood begin echoing in his ears. Their dreams of building castles, Victoria's innocent laughter, and that unbreakable promise. Stephen's own theory starts hammering in his mind. Every possible event has already happened, is happening now, and will happen again. Will Stephen be able to save his love? Stephen has completely shattered under the weight of his guilt. He goes to that same old cursed well and bends inside it, calling out to his childhood friend in a painful voice, "Goosey!" But no reply comes from the darkness. His mother, Jane, arrives there in panic while searching for him. Stephen tells his mother that he thought if he went to the well and said one final goodbye to her, then maybe he would find peace. But then he stops and says in a heavy voice, "It's not enough." Jane becomes very emotional. To calm him down, she gives him something and says, "I love you, Stephen." But then Stephen looks into his mother's eyes and asks a question that opens terrifying secrets from many years ago. Was Robert my real father? And all those stories that you had been telling me since childhood, that my father was a great scientist, was all of that one huge lie? Friends, this is a truth that turns Stephen's whole world upside down in a single moment. But the real explosion is about to happen now. Stephen's mentor, Dr. Schmidt, presents a theory that changes the entire viewpoint of this whole film from the roots. Dr. Schmidt, while explaining a very deep thing, says that the human mind is very strange and mysterious. It sees only what it wants to see. Sometimes the pain of reality is so terrible that our mind weaves a strong curtain of fiction to protect us. Then Dr. Schmidt says something that sends chills down the spine. Stephen, according to your own theory of parallel universes, there must surely be one universe where it was not Victoria who fell into the well that day, but you yourself. a universe where you struggled for hours to stay alive in that horrible darkness and cold water. That experience was so painful that when you were pulled out of the well, you went into a catatonic state. You became trapped in a world where your consciousness is alive only through imagination. Dr. Schmidt asks, "Does such a universe exist?" Stephen softly says, "Yes." And then Dr. Schmidt's final question shakes Stephen's soul. "Stephen, have you ever thought that maybe you are actually in that very universe, and all this is only your illusion?" Friends, just think for a moment. Is all of this real? Is this time machine, Annie, Conrad, all these events? Are all of these just the game of Stephen's sick mind while lying on a hospital bed? This terrifying twist explodes in the mind like a bomb. But Stephen's obsession has gone far beyond this truth or illusion. He decides that no matter what happens, whether this world is real or false, he will build his time machine and he will meet Victoria. Stephen and Annie, without wasting any time, start working on building a new and better machine. Annie risks her life and brings even more parts by stealing them from the university. Stephen says very happily, "Annie, you're brilliant." Annie laughs proudly and says, "I know." The machine slowly begins to take shape. Stephen prepares a very complex map of his time travel route. Meanwhile, Annie discovers such a terrifying truth that the ground slips from under her feet. While talking, Stephen lets it slip that this machine has no system for coming back at all. It is a one-way street. Annie is shocked. Stephen says that in some other dimension, he may not stay alive for very long, and only depending on luck, he is taking this very big gamble. Crying, Annie says that after so much planning, everything has been left only to luck. Stephen only says, "Insane, isn't it?" At last, that final moment arrives. Stephen is standing near the well for his final journey and is watching those waves of time. With a heavy heart, Annie asks, "How much time will it take?" Stephen calmly replies, "A few seconds, a few decades, or maybe an eternity." With tears, Annie asks, "You are going forever just to spend a few moments together?" Stephen's answer is, "Yes." Just then his mother Jane comes there. The mother who always supported him. Today she begs him crying, "Please don't go." Stephen says emotionally that the days he spent with Victoria were the most beautiful days of his life. While leaving, Stephen asks his mother that same innocent childhood question again. "Was my father also a great scientist?" And Jane, crying, repeats the same old answer. A great scientist. Friends, the story is now at its most emotional climax. The new machine is ready, and there is an atmosphere of celebration. Annie gives Stephen a good luck kiss. Just then Conrad arrives, and his anger buried for years bursts out. A fight begins between the two, just like in childhood. Conrad expresses his pain. "I did not drop Victoria's rope on purpose. I myself would have gone down to pick it up." Crying, he says that he should get the first chance to go into the machine. Stephen calms him and says that he knows this. In the middle of this, Stephen makes a big decision. Looking into Annie's eyes, he says, "Annie, I'm falling in love with you." He says that she should stop him. Annie's answer will make you cry. She says, "You are an amazing person, but I'm not falling in love with you." Stephen's heart breaks, but in the very next moment, Annie says, "I'm not falling in love because I already love you." These words could have stopped Stephen. A beautiful life was waiting for him, but Stephen knows that without going into the past, he will never be able to truly live his real life. This journey is a one-way street. Returning is impossible. Stephen is standing at the edge of the well for the final journey. He counts like in childhood. 1 elephant, 2 elephant. Annie also joins in crying. Stephen says, "Goodbye, Goosey." And with that, he jumps into that deep, dark well, into the endless vortex of time. Stephen put his new love and future at stake, just to meet Victoria one last time. But the suspense remains here. Did this time travel really happen? Or was all of this an illusion? A dream of a child who is actually drowning in the cold water of that well and living an imaginary life in his mind before death? Whatever the truth is, the film teaches that life is a one-way street where we just have to keep moving forward, whether there is a road back or not.